Say hello to my guest, Jennifer McCaney, here at LSI 2022. Jennifer, thanks for coming by the studio.
Hi, Ben. Great to see you as always.
We started off the morning, day 3 of LSI, did our panel on ecosystem. How did that go for you?
Fantastic. I think it's such a wonderful opportunity, one, to sit down with you and with members of different ecosystems. So Tiffany Wilson from Philadelphia, previously heralding the Georgia ecosystem, and of course, Susan Wyndham-Bannister, who built the Massachusetts Life Science Bio Association and Ecosystem. So fantastic opportunity to have a discussion with both coasts.
You know, Jennifer, it was so funny whenever we were putting this together, you just sort of like, you do this so much to me, like this little throw off. Hey, Ben, do you know Sue? And then I think your quip was, well, mass challenge. So here I was thinking, because I would see those startups at South by. Last night at dinner, she was just regaling us with these stories about how ecosystem can happen, and if you're just deliberate about it. Is that what's happening at UCLA?
I think that's a great lead-in, Ben. A lot of the work that Sue did in Massachusetts foreshadows what we can do here in Los Angeles. We have so many diverse talents, assets within our region, and we're really trying with UCLA, as well as many of our partners in the Los Angeles County area, to advance the life science ecosystem, to build the talent we need, and to create a diverse community of innovators.
So when I come down to visit you, that's Westwood, so the boy from West Texas learning more about California. We were together down in Santa Monica. We saw some of the digital things that were happening there. And then I've got friends at Cedars. But when we went down to BCG, Manhattan Beach, so that flight to LA, that was my last thing before the pandemic. So now with Sue and seeing what Bioscience LA is doing, Culver City. So now I think we've got this triangulation. We had our axis of innovation, now triangulation. What do you think is going to happen in Culver City?
I think Bioscience LA is really creating that public-private partnership that we desperately need here in Los Angeles to create the momentum for the region, such that we bring UCLA, Caltech, USC, and the other universities in our area together. Now, that is sort of just on the front end, right? So that's the innovation, front end of the innovation funnel. We also need to think about the further downstream, how do we get the innovation back into our system, back into our community, and to the patients who need it.
Yeah, so another way you're bringing back into the ecosystem is the work you're doing with UCLA Health. Not only, you've got the work at Anderson, but this bringing in, we've kind of jokingly called it the catch and release. So bring them in, run them through the fellowship, put them right back in. But I recently saw a post that you did talking about, at a higher level and really internal, it's really about training the future leaders of the health system. That snuck up on me, Jennifer. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, Ben, it's a good distinction, because I think a lot of what we thought about in terms of the traditional biodesign philosophy is the innovation component. And as we see innovations come out, we need the talent, but we also need the leaders to lift up the innovations, both at the industry side and at the implementation side. And one of our goals at Biodesign, I think that's why Biodesign fundamentally, when it was first started at Stanford, brought together the different disciplines. And so I am seeing more and more clinicians wanting to find that career where they can do medicine plus X. And maybe that's public health or public policy. Maybe that's innovation. Maybe that's chief medical officer, medical advisor to a company or to a technology. And so we've integrated a leadership and business component into our biodesign program to specifically enable those clinical trainees, as well as the engineering, the business folks, to come up with those skills such that we can better implement technology on the downstream end of innovation when it's time to implement it.
That's been one of the things that I've enjoyed. We've been working together now for going on 7 years, and as I see more of this, the evolution of the work, I put my mind back. I've known Scott Pentel for almost 20 years. You look at Biodesigns at 20 years, you think about what we did 20 years ago in innovation, and Biodesign, specifically at Stanford, it was always, we need a 3-legged stool. We've got engineers talking to doctors. Doctors have ideas. They're making, really, we had a shiny object production system. Just getting the voice of the business in there, adding the MBA to understand the business. But now as I look back on that, well, it's not just one engineer. Where's the data scientist? Look at any clinical scenario. It's not one doctor. You might have teams of doctors in different disciplines. How is UCLA starting to look at tackling that? That if you have that ecosystem wide, are you able to bring in all those voices that we desperately need?
Yeah, Ben, it's an excellent point. Data is a fundamental component of the medtech industry, of healthcare, in terms of enabling us to, one, identify adverse events, identify unmet needs, and also find tools to solve those needs. And so one of the things that we do very purposefully at UCLA is work with our Office of Health Informatics and Analytics to better understand our data resources, such that we can understand which patient population will this treat. What is the financial impact based on the historical data we have of how much this has cost, how much OR time, and really think about, will this innovation move the needle? Now, it's not just the financial pieces, it's the quality pieces, because we're concerned about outcomes. So by utilizing data, we can also better understand, will outcomes change? Because it could lead to lower OR time or faster procedure time, but ultimately outcomes will drive better patient care. And so using data to help us better understand quality and outcomes associated with new innovations or potential new innovations, because we're just at that crucible of new innovation at the Biodesign program. We want to better implement innovation and data together. So data is often considered the conduit of the innovation, but we can use data to define the innovation.
It's interesting that you mentioned that twist on that, because we see the fellows at the beginning of the year. I give them some really basic tools, and then it's always fun that they come back 6-7 months later, and then I bring them right back to those tools. And in the 6 steps, we talk about the 3 different modes of innovation, so that straight all the way through, or maybe you have a handoff, you have an alliance, or maybe you just innovate within some of the steps. And that team actually went right to what you're talking about. They were thinking in that, I'm going to start a company, go all the way through, have a product, enter the market. And they began, you could just see the light bulbs come on. What if we just helped UCLA use the data they've already got just to deliver care better? And it was kind of that slow, and that could be a thing. And that was an incredible moment, because I was like, thank goodness. There's so much of that needs to happen now, getting innovation deep into, how do we get approval? What does it mean to get payment? What is delivery? How do we scale? Those are areas that were almost untouched.
Yeah, and I think, Ben, your analogy of the Polaroid and sort of the old world masters and the masterpiece, and the fellows need to be able to pivot between the Polaroid and the masterpiece. And sometimes you get too focused on the masterpiece. And sometimes all you really need is that snapshot to spark the idea. And so I think that your visits are extremely valuable, wanting kind of just opening their eyes to that panoramic view, if you will, as well as giving them a sounding board and a support system to be able to come back and have a chat with Ben and see what you think and get that feedback. Because that closing the loop on that mentor relationship is so important.
The health tech study, I think that you're at an endpoint on that. What's going on with that?
Kwame and I are working with one of our UCLA Biodesign fellows, Christian Johnson, and the team at BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and we just launched an industry report on the impact of regulation on innovation in the global landscape. And so we're really excited about this in terms of giving industry some benchmarks, as well as understanding what are the major shifts in the global medtech landscape. Now, there are many fundamental underlying dynamics, of course. We've got MDR in Europe. We've got changing landscape at the FDA in terms of MCIT being, pen and paper is down on that right now. We're waiting to see what's next for our breakthrough device program. But many of those emerging themes come to the forefront in this report.
So Jennifer, we all remember Josh Mackauer going to FDA and really being a lightning rod for the grave concerns we all had. The agency was seen as being the logjam that was preventing innovation. Many people pivoted to European entry, CE mark first, and that led to the agency is a much better collaborator now. I love Kwame's quote. I always have to get his tagline before you talk to the FDA. Talk to the FDA, and just something so simple. But in your study now, what should the industry be looking at now? What are some of those high points?
Ben, you're exactly right. There's been a lot of fundamental changes, and I think just to echo what you said, the report done by Josh and his colleagues at Stanford really was a catalyst to help facilitate some of the changes that we've seen over the last decade. So previously, Josh and his colleagues had looked at 2000 to 2010, what was happening, what needs to happen, because innovation is not making it fast enough to patients in the US. And furthermore, there were many levels of lack of transparency, need for guidance, and several other cracks, if you will, in the system, in addition to cost. And so what we wanted to do is better understand, well, what happened after 2010, since MDUFA was implemented, as well as some of the other fundamental, more recent change, like the Center for Digital Health Excellence, the Breakthrough Device Program, guidance on AI/ML products, enhanced guidance on 510K, de novo, and PMA products. So we wanted to look at that as a basket of levers or kind of policy enablers for innovation in the US. And so what we found is that there's been a fundamental shift looking forward. So kind of the prospective view now is that given the changing landscape in the US, coupled with the implementation of MDR in Europe, first in class, meaning not a product line extension, not an incremental innovation, really first in class new technologies are looking to the US first because of that innovation policy that's been implemented, as well as the difficulties seen with a European path. Now, it doesn't mean that Europe is more difficult than the US because the scales weren't balanced before, right? It was very much favoring, like you said, an EU first entry strategy. And we've talked to several EU-based companies whose investors won't sign the check until it's very clear they have a US first strategy. So a fundamental shift in the global ecosystem for medtech innovation, as well as some other key findings.
When I think about UCLA and then a lot of the larger health systems, because you guys have, I always give you too many credits, I lose count. You've got so many hospitals, but coming to work there, 4 hospitals playing together or at least unified. You look at Alan Russell, who I always credit for being sort of the chief radicalization officer for me when Highmark and Allegheny came together. So is there a way that US hospitals, US hospital systems, provider networks can be really innovation ready to where the innovation, if it's there, I'm not saying roll over, but did you guys identify any pathways that'll make our system more innovation ready?
And we did, and I'll say that it's just a little bit further upstream. So before it gets to the health system, one of the other major findings we had is that reimbursement has emerged as really the true barrier to patient access to innovation. And that historically wasn't the case in that previous decade to the last decade, from that 2000 to 2010. There's several reasons for that. One is that when we look at the shifting bundle of digital products, there is no benefit category for digital health products. So the reimbursement path for digital is seen as highly uncertain and unpredictable, both in the US and in Europe. The other fact that we're seeing is that for truly novel products, there is no clear reimbursement pathway. Now, we had a glimmer of a kind of a window with the Medicare coverage for innovative technology rule, because there was going to be the promise, if you will, of national coverage 4 years following regulatory decision. However, that is on hold, as we know. But ultimately, that was just smoothing over what is an even further underlying gap in the system, which is, of course, even if you are a breakthrough product, even if you qualify for what might be a new version of MCIT, if you don't have a code, you're still not going to get through the funnel, because MCIT won't help you if there's no code to provide coverage. And so when we think about the fundamental components that are now hampering patient access to innovation, reimbursement is really emerging. And what we've seen, of course, is several innovative payers, right, integrated systems, as well as employers are picking up, they're picking up sort of the slack there, and they're providing coverage for novel digital solutions or novel technologies through employee-administered health plans. But the real question is that providing coverage to everyone that needs it? And the answer is no. And so what we really need is new policy at the state and federal level to better enable reimbursement of novel products, including digital, as well as some of these cutting-edge innovations that don't even have a defined reimbursement path.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that I talk to my reimbursement friends. So one of my
they're
ways,
all here.
Exactly, they are, and to talk to them, and again, one of the things I love about LSI is in a 3-day period, I can really we talked about ecosystem. This is ecosystem. It's also community, and to get those people that, they see the art of their part of the system, their part of the cycle, and the art of that. How do you do reimbursement? How do you get delivery? And so it's always fun to hear more about that. But what strikes me is, is this procedure-based? Can I cover the procedure? Do I have to cover the product? I had a short conversation over breakfast today that really made me sit back and go, maybe you don't need one. You don't need to cover your product. Cover it under the procedure and help the economic piece be understood by the provider.
That's a good point. And I think one of the things the caveat there is that when you look at your end user in terms of the health system, it depends on the system. It depends on who you're selling to, because ultimately, if their payer mix is heavily skewed towards a public payer, a Medicare or Medi-Cal, for example, they might not be able to support the economics of that, right? So covering it under a procedure versus a specific one-off device. And so we need to have a way to have some flexibility in the system, as well as recognize that there are a lot of health systems out there kind of doing the good work and treating a wide category of socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic backgrounds, and their patient-payer mix is fundamentally skewed.
And then added to that, telehealth, which nobody knows what to do with, and became an extraordinarily useful tool during COVID, but is it going to stay around? Are they going to pull that rug out from underneath us? And then where is all of the digital and AI enabled? How does that all fit in? It's almost like we have to reimagine the reimbursement piece, the delivery piece. We need innovation to come and breathe some new life into that.
And I think that the next decade will hopefully be centered around that piece, the reimbursement component. And there's many aspects of the reimbursement apparatus, if you will. But I would hope that for the sake of innovation in our industry and for patients having access to novel technology, and even technology in general that can improve their quality of life, that we will see innovation in the payer space, as well. I just don't want to pick on CMS, because ultimately, private payers bear responsibility as well. And so I think as an ecosystem as a whole, like you said, we need to come together and figure out novel ways to pay for new technology, because if we're going to be looking at preventative care, we ultimately won't see the benefits until further downstream.
So Jennifer, what we were calling the health tech study is actually called Interstates and Autobahns. That's out on the streets now. It's pretty dense. You did a lot of work with that with your team. So what are the recommendations that came out of that? I know you're inviting people. Kwame did when we talked to him yesterday. Really, we need people to go and read it for themselves, but are there recommendations that came out of it?
Yes, Ben. We actually have a set of three different categories of recommendations. Really, it's meant to start the discussion amongst the ecosystem that is our industry, as well as the digital health industry, because many digital health products have a regulated component that may be subject to enforcement discretion. So when looking at recommendations for industries, whether large or small, there are a few kind of key themes that we saw emerge. One is around just the preparation process. So really thinking about maximizing the utility of your Q-sub. So what we found is that for really innovative, novel products, the benefits of the Q-sub were felt to be perceived to be quite beneficial because of that early communication that can happen and the feedback on several critical criteria. We also saw that many startups felt that communication with the FDA and collaboration with the FDA was a critical component. However, what some folks don't realize is that information shared with the FDA becomes part of the public record. So it's important to realize that FDA, they're just like us. However, FDA is a regulated entity, and these are legal documents. So really kind of being ready, it's good to call and establish that relationship with the FDA, but make sure you're ready to have that call. Another thing that we found is particularly for truly innovative products, utilizing outside regulatory consultants with specific domain expertise. If you're pursuing a de novo, a breakthrough, an AI/ML product, those can be a fundamental advantage to bring expertise into an early stage team where you might not already have those capabilities. And one caveat that I'll add is that third-party reviewers do present an appealing opportunity. However, innovators should recognize that no one will know your product as well as you do. So when you're using a third-party reviewer to advocate for you in front of the FDA, you ultimately might be sort of cutting yourself short in terms of best representing your product to the agency. Ben, there's one other caveat I want to mention, and that's around reimbursement planning, because as we started diving into this study, reimbursement kept emerging right up to the forefront. And so what we found is that a lot of early stage, maybe sometimes first time innovators don't start the reimbursement planning process early enough. And that really eats into your cash, because you might only be conducting one clinical study. And if you haven't conducted your clinical studies to support your reimbursement outcomes or the outcomes payers are looking for, you're set yourself up to get regulatory approval and need a second study to get to, a commercialization strategy. So I think that starting reimbursement earlier is fundamentally important, and it should start at the phase of regulatory planning.
Jennifer McCaney, take 2.